There is a glass of water sitting on the counter of every traditional Japanese kitchen I visited in rural Kyushu before anyone opens a new jar of honey. It is not for drinking, it is for testing. One spoonful of honey goes into that glass, and in 10 seconds that glass tells you something the label on the jar will never admit. Most of the honey sold in American supermarkets today is not honey at all. It is a syrup blend, sometimes containing as little as 20% actual honey, mixed with corn syrup, rice syrup, or sugar water, and labeled as pure honey because the regulations allow it. I am going to show you exactly how to test any jar of honey in your kitchen right now, in 10 seconds with nothing but a glass of water. Then I am going to walk you through exactly how this became legal, who benefited, and why the agency responsible for stopping it chose not to. Here is the number that should concern you. A 2021 investigation conducted by Food Safety News sent honey samples purchased from major American retailers to an independent laboratory for isotope ratio analysis, the gold standard test for detecting sugar adulteration. 43% of the samples tested showed clear evidence of adulteration with cheap sugar syrups. Some samples contained zero detectable pollen, one of the primary biological markers used to confirm that a product actually originated from bees rather than a syrup blending facility. This was not a small regional problem. This was nearly half of all honey tested across major national retail chains. The FDA's own legal definition of honey requires that nothing be added to it. No water, no corn syrup, no rice syrup, no cane sugar. The definition is clear and has existed in some form since 1906. But the enforcement of that definition has been almost non-existent for the past 2 decades. Internal FDA records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests showed fewer than a dozen honey-specific inspections conducted across the entire country between 2015 and 2020, despite the agency's own laboratory data showing widespread adulteration in imported honey supplies during that exact period. Let me give you the historical context, because this did not happen overnight. In the early 2000s, the United States imposed anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese honey after American beekeepers demonstrated that Chinese producers were selling honey below production cost, destroying the domestic honey market. The tariffs, which in some cases exceeded 200%, were designed to protect American beekeeping operations. Chinese honey exporters responded by developing what the industry now calls transshipping. Honey produced in China would be shipped to a third country, sometimes India, Vietnam, or Malaysia, repackaged with new country of origin paperwork, and then exported to the United States as a product of that third country, completely avoiding the anti-dumping tariffs. The American Honey Producers Association estimated in a 2019 report that transshipped and laundered honey accounted for as much as 1/3 of all honey entering the United States market that year. The honey itself was frequently cut with rice syrup or corn syrup during processing to increase volume and further reduce cost, since the laundering process already obscured the supply chain enough that quality verification became nearly impossible at the import inspection level. The National Honey Packers and Dealers Association, the trade group representing honey importers and packers, lobbied against mandatory pollen testing standards throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s. Their stated position was that pollen testing requirements would impose excessive costs on importers and packers, particularly smaller operations that could not absorb laboratory testing fees on every shipment. The FDA drafted a proposed honey standard in 2006 that would have established clear labeling and purity requirements, similar to standards already in place in the European Union and several other countries. That standard was never finalized. It remains, as of this recording, still listed as a draft guidance document, nearly 2 decades after it was first proposed. Now let me show you why Japanese farming families never needed government regulation to solve this problem for themselves, and why the test they developed still works perfectly today. Pure honey has a moisture content of approximately 17 to 18%, a relatively narrow range that results from the specific way bees process nectar through repeated regurgitation and enzymatic conversion inside the hive, gradually reducing the water content until the honey reaches the thick, viscous consistency we recognize. This process also creates a dense molecular sugar structure, primarily composed of fructose and glucose, in specific ratios that differ meaningfully from refined sugar syrups. That density and molecular structure is the entire basis of the water test, because real honey, due to its viscosity and sugar density, does not dissolve quickly when introduced to room temperature water. It sinks as a cohesive mass, holding its shape and dissolving slowly and uniformly from the outside surface inward, similar to how a solid ice cube melts gradually rather than dispersing instantly. Syrup-adulterated honey behaves in a fundamentally different way because the added syrups, whether corn syrup, rice syrup, or simple cane sugar dissolved in water, have a much higher moisture content and a thinner, less viscous molecular structure. When that blended product is introduced to water, the syrup components begin dissolving almost immediately, creating visible streaks and cloudy dispersal patterns as the substance falls through the water rather than holding together as a defined shape. The test itself takes 10 seconds and requires nothing beyond a clear glass and room temperature water, something every kitchen already has. Here is exactly how to perform it. Fill a clear drinking glass with room temperature water, filling it roughly 3/4 full. Take 1 full tablespoon of the honey you want to test from the jar. Hold the spoon a few inches above the surface of the water and drop the honey into the glass without stirring or disturbing the water in any way. Watch closely for the next 10 seconds. Real, pure honey will sink in a relatively defined mass toward the bottom of the glass, holding its general shape as it descends. The surrounding water will remain mostly clear, with the honey beginning a slow, gradual dissolution from the outer surface only after it settles, not during the fall itself. Adulterated honey behaves completely differently. As it falls through the water, you will observe visible streaking and cloudy dispersal almost immediately, sometimes within the first 1 to 2 seconds. By the time 10 seconds have passed, the water will appear visibly murky or cloudy, and there will be little to no defined honey shape remaining at the bottom of the glass. The substance has essentially begun dissolving on contact rather than sinking intact. That visual difference, intact mass versus immediate cloudy dispersal, is unmistakable once you have seen both side by side, and it requires no laboratory equipment, no isotope testing, and no trust in a label printed by the same company selling you the product. Japanese apiarists and beekeeping cooperatives in Kyushu documented this exact water test in regional farming guides dating back to the early 20th century. It became standard household practice precisely because there was no third-party verification system available to ordinary families, and someone purchasing honey at a local market needed an immediate, reliable method to confirm authenticity before paying for the product. This was knowledge passed down through generations of beekeeping families, refined through decades of practical observation rather than laboratory science. Yet it aligns precisely with what modern chemistry confirms about honey's molecular density and viscosity. I spoke with a beekeeper in Vermont who has produced raw, small-batch honey for 11 years and regularly demonstrates this exact water test for customers at her local farmers market. As an educational exercise, she told me that when she began systematically testing honey from 5 major national retail brands, using this method as a side-by-side comparison for curious customers, 3 out of the 5 brand jars showed clear, immediate signs of cloudy dispersal consistent with syrup adulteration, while only 2 settled and held their shape the way her own raw honey did. She made the decision after that demonstration to stop purchasing any commercial honey for her own household entirely, buying exclusively from beekeepers she could personally verify. Her honey now costs more per jar than the supermarket alternative, but she told me she would rather pay more for something she knows is genuine than pay less for something dressed up to look like the real thing. Here is what I want you to do today, right now, if you have a jar of honey in your kitchen. Fill a clear glass with room temperature water. Take a single spoonful from your honey jar, drop it into the water without stirring, count to 10 and watch closely. If the honey sinks and holds its shape with the water remaining mostly clear around it, you have genuine honey. If it dissolves rapidly and clouds the water within those 10 seconds, what you have been spreading on your toast and stirring into your tea is, at least in part, sugar syrup marketed under a honey label that the regulatory system has allowed to exist for nearly 2 decades. Drop the word glass in the comments below if you are testing your honey today And tell me which brand you tested and what happened when you did. I read every single comment. Next week, I am showing you the Japanese method for telling if olive oil is genuinely pure or cut with cheaper seed oils, using a test that takes 30 seconds and requires nothing more than your refrigerator. The adulteration numbers in the olive oil industry are significantly worse than what we just covered with honey today, and almost nobody outside the industry itself knows the full extent of it. That video is coming next week.